You know what the most powerful revenge really is? It's not anger. It's not proving someone wrong. It's not even showing them what they lost. The most powerful revenge is silence. See, when a super empath meets an avoidant, something dangerous happens. The empath pours in love, consistency, and presence. The avoidant, terrified of intimacy, pulls away, retreats, makes excuses. For a while, the empath bends, overgives, and sacrifices, thinking, if I just love harder, maybe they'll finally see my worth. But here's the twist. The super empath eventually realizes this isn't love. This is starvation. And the one thing an empath eventually learns to do, the silent revenge, is not to chase, not to plead, not to explain. It's to walk away quietly, without announcement, without drama. And here's the beautiful irony. The avoidant's greatest fear is losing control, and the empath's greatest gift is realizing they don't need anyone who can't stand in the fire with them. The silent revenge is not making them miss you. It's making you rediscover you. It's reclaiming your energy, your self-respect, and your emotional generosity, and saving it for someone who knows how to cherish it. And the avoidant, they're left with the echo of your absence. Not because you punished them, but because you finally loved yourself more than you loved convincing them. That is the quiet revolution. That is the silent revenge. Silence is the ultimate power, but most people don't understand why until they experience it for themselves. We are conditioned to believe that when someone hurts us, the strongest response is to fight back, to argue, to prove our worth through words, or to show them what they are missing through grand gestures. That's what our ego craves. It wants validation. It wants the other person to notice. It wants to be heard. But silence, real silence, is different. Silence is not passive. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the loudest statement you can ever make because it carries a weight that words never could. When you stop talking, when you stop explaining, when you stop justifying yourself, you shift the entire balance of power. When an avoidant pulls away, they expect a reaction. They expect the empath to plead, to chase, to ask why, to reassure them, to fill in the gaps they create with their absence. They thrive on that cycle because every time the empath chases, the avoidant feels validated in their ability to control the rhythm of connection. But silence interrupts that cycle. Silence breaks the script. Suddenly, the avoidant is faced with something unfamiliar. The empath not playing the role they've always relied on. The empath is no longer feeding the dynamic, no longer soothing their fears, no longer providing the energy that makes the push-pull possible. In that stillness, the avoidant doesn't just lose attention, they lose their sense of control. For the empath, silence is not just about withholding communication from the other person, it's about reclaiming it for themselves. Every word not spoken to someone who refuses to listen is a word kept safe, a piece of energy preserved. Silence creates space. It gives the empath room to hear their own voice again, room to notice how much noise they've been living in just to maintain a connection that was never truly reciprocal. That space is healing because it strips away the illusion that you need to keep giving in order to be valued. The silence says, I have nothing left to prove. It says my worth is not up for negotiation. What makes silence so powerful is that it doesn't seek an audience. It's not designed to make the other person come back, though sometimes it does. It's not designed to teach them a lesson, though it often leaves them haunted. The real power lies in the fact that silence is for the empath, not for the avoidant. It's an act of self-respect, an invisible shield that communicates more than anger or tears ever could. And here's the paradox. What the avoidant fears most is intimacy, yet what they fear second most is the absence of the empath's presence. When the empath finally falls silent, they give both those fears to the avoidant at once. They deny them the intimacy they resisted, and they deny them the safety net of constant pursuits. Silence is not revenge in the way most people imagine it. It's not a weapon pointed outward. It's a declaration turned inward. It's the quiet realization that your time, your energy, and your peace are far too valuable to be wasted on someone who only values them when they're gone. That is why silence is the ultimate power. It speaks volumes without ever making a sound. The empath's overgiving cycle is one of the most exhausting and heartbreaking patterns in relationships because it often begins with the best of intentions. Super empaths enter relationships with open hearts, willing to give their time, attention, and emotional energy without holding back. They pride themselves on being generous with love. They believe that if someone feels safe, supported, and cared for, they will naturally open up and reciprocate. So when they encounter an avoidant, they assume the walls and distance are simply wounds that can be healed with enough patience and devotion. They think, if I just love harder, if I show them consistency, if I prove I won't leave, maybe they'll finally feel secure. That is the entry point to the cycle. The avoidant, however, operates on an entirely different set of fears and defenses. Intimacy feels threatening, closeness feels suffocating, and vulnerability feels unsafe. So when the empath offers more love, the avoidant instinctively retreats. That retreat activates the empath's nurturing instinct, and they respond by giving even more. The cycle repeats again and again. The more distance the avoidant creates, the more the empath invests in trying to bridge it. Instead of recognizing the imbalance, the empath often interprets the distance as a challenge they must overcome. They believe they have to work harder to keep the connection alive, and in doing so, they begin to abandon themselves little by little. Over time, this cycle becomes exhausting because the empath starts carrying the entire relationship on their back. They become the emotional regulator, the initiator of communication, the planner, the healer, the problem solver. Meanwhile, the avoidant becomes accustomed to receiving this outpouring of care without ever truly stepping forward themselves. It creates a dynamic where one person is constantly pouring while the other is constantly pulling away. The empath doesn't always realize the cost of this dynamic until they feel drained, unappreciated, and invisible. The tragedy of the overgiving cycle is that it comes from a place of love, but often leads to self-neglect. The empath may begin to confuse overextending with devotion, thinking that sacrifice is proof of love. They convince themselves that giving more will eventually unlock the other person's heart. But what actually happens is the empath teaches the avoidant that they don't need to change, because the empath will always adapt, always forgive, always chase, always soothe. That unconscious training keeps the avoidant stuck in their patterns, while the empath sinks deeper into resentment and depletion. Breaking this cycle is incredibly difficult because it requires the empath to go against their instincts. Their natural impulse is to heal, to give, to care. But the very thing that makes them extraordinary is also what traps them when given to someone unwilling to meet them halfway. The overgiving cycle is like pouring water into a bucket with a hole at the bottom. No matter how much you give, it will never feel full. And until the empath realizes that their love is not being reciprocated, they will keep pouring, hoping for a moment that rarely arrives. The realization moment is not a single flash of insight, but rather a slow accumulation of truths that can no longer be ignored. For a super empath, it often begins as a faint whisper, a quiet discomfort in the background of their devotion. At first, they brush it aside, telling themselves they are just being impatient or expecting too much. They rationalize the avoidance behavior. They've been hurt before, they just need time. Maybe they show love differently. They cling to hope that their consistency will eventually break through the walls. But the whisper doesn't go away. It grows louder with each unanswered message, with each plan cancelled at the last minute, with each attempt at closeness met with withdrawal. The empath starts to notice how tired they feel, not physically, but emotionally. The relationship begins to feel like a job rather than a partnership. They catch themselves rehearsing conversations in their head, planning how to say things so they won't scare the avoidant away, constantly editing their needs into smaller, quieter requests. And that's when the cracks in the illusion begin to show. Because love is supposed to expand you, not shrink you. It's supposed to make you feel more alive, not more anxious. The empath, for all their patience, cannot escape the truth that they are starving in a relationship where their love has no place to land. This realization is often painful because it goes against the empath's deepest wiring. They are used to believing that more love solves everything. But here, more love only seems to create more distance. The harder they try, the colder the avoidant becomes. It's like running towards someone who keeps stepping back. Eventually, you realize you're running in circles, exhausting yourself for nothing. That's the moment of awakening. The empath begins to see that the problem isn't a lack of effort, it's a lack of reciprocity. They finally recognize that they are in a one-sided relationship where their needs have been quietly dismissed in favor of maintaining someone else's comfort. What makes this realization so transformative is not just the awareness of the imbalance, but the recognition of self-betrayal. The empath sees how many times they silenced their own needs, how many times they excused behavior that hurt them, how many times they abandoned themselves just to hold on. That awareness hits hard because it forces them to confront the truth that love should never cost them their dignity or peace. The ache of that truth is what pushes them to shift. Once the realization is clear, there is no going back. The empath cannot unsee the truth that they deserve more than breadcrumbs, more than half presents, more than a relationship where they have to beg for the bare minimum. The very same empathy that kept them giving becomes the empathy that saves them because they finally extend it inward. The realization moment is not about blaming the avoidant. It's about reclaiming themselves. It's the turning point where hope is no longer pinned on someone else's change, but on the empath's decision to stop settling for starvation. The silent revenge in action is not a grand gesture, not a dramatic exit, not a fiery confrontation where every grievance is laid on the table. It is something far more subtle, far more powerful, and far more disarming. It begins the moment the super empath decides that their energy is too valuable to be wasted on someone who cannot hold it. At first, this decision is quiet, almost invisible. They stop sending the long, thoughtful messages that always went unanswered. They stop rearranging their schedule to fit into someone else's life. They stop initiating conversations that never went deeper than surface level. From the outside, it may look like nothing, but for the empath, it is everything. It is the moment they reclaim their power by refusing to pour into a cup with no bottom. What makes this action so profound is that it is not designed to punish the avoidant. The empath isn't thinking, "I'll show them." They are thinking, "I'll show me." They begin to redirect the same energy they once invested in the relationship back toward themselves. The late night overthinking is replaced with rest. The emotional labor once spent decoding mixed signals is now poured into passions, friendships, and self-growth. The silence becomes fertile ground for renewal, and in that renewal, the empath starts to feel whole again. Meanwhile, the avoidant who once relied on the predictability of the empath's pursuit suddenly finds the script has changed. They were accustomed to the chase, to the reassurance, to the comfort of knowing the empath would always be there, no matter how far they retreated. But silence leaves no reassurance, no pursuit, no energy to lean on. It disrupts the rhythm they had grown comfortable with, and that disruption often feels louder than any confrontation ever could. The absence of the empath's presence is felt in every unreturned call that never comes, in every effort that is no longer made, in every moment of distance that is no longer bridged for them. The beauty of this silent revenge is in its simplicity. It is not about theatrics, it is about alignment. The empath no longer invests in places where they are not valued. They no longer sacrifice their well-being for the chance of being chosen. And that choice, though it makes no noise, shakes the foundation of the avoidant dynamic. The empath is no longer playing the game, and without their participation, the game collapses. This kind of silence is powerful because it forces both people to face themselves. For the empath, it is a mirror that reflects back their strength, their worth, and their ability to create boundaries. For the avoidant, it is a mirror that reflects back the emptiness left behind when someone stops carrying the relationship for them. The silent revenge in action is the empath's refusal to fight for someone who was never fighting alongside them, and in that refusal, they discover a strength that makes words unnecessary. The final shift of power is one of the most liberating experiences for a super empath, though it rarely feels that way at first. For so long, the avoidant has dictated the rhythm of the connection, deciding when to come close, when to pull away, when to respond, and when to retreat. The empath, caught in the cycle of overgiving, adjust themselves to that rhythm, often without realizing they've surrendered control. But when the empath chooses silence, when they step away from the endless pursuit, the dynamic changes completely. The avoidant, who once felt in control, is suddenly faced with the reality that the person they assumed would always be there is gone. That absence is not just physical, it's energetic. The emotional anchor that kept the relationship afloat has been lifted, and the avoidant is left to drift alone. For the empath, this shift is not about winning or proving a point. It is about rediscovering their own strength after a long period of depletion. They realize that the love they kept giving so freely can now be directed inward. The energy they once spent analyzing mixed signals or soothing someone else's fears is invested in themselves. It is in this redirection that the true shift of power occurs. The empath begins to glow differently, carrying themselves with a sense of self-respect that was once buried under self-sacrifice. This change is not always loud or obvious to others, but it is deeply felt within. The avoidant, on the other hand, often experiences the absence as a shock. They were accustomed to the empath's constant reassurance, the consistent presence that validated their importance without demanding much in return. When that disappears, they may initially dismiss it, thinking it is temporary, but as the silence stretches, the reality sinks in. The empath is not playing the game anymore. There are no arguments, no explanations, no attempts to win them back. The silence speaks louder than words ever could, and for someone who thrives on control, that silence can be unsettling. What makes this shift so profound is that it doesn't require the empath to do anything to the avoidant. There is no confrontation, no revenge plotted out of anger, no performance designed to get attention. The power shifts simply because the empath stops participating in a dynamic that drained them. They are no longer waiting for the avoidant to validate their worth. They have found that validation in themselves. And in that moment, the avoidant's control dissolves because control only exists when someone keeps responding to it. The final shift of power leaves the empath free from the endless cycle of chasing, free from the illusion that more love could fix someone else's fear, free from the self-betrayal that came with ignoring their own needs. The avoidant is left with silence, but the empath is left with strength, and that strength is the truest form of power, quiet, steady, and unshakable. And so, when we talk about the silent revenge of a super empath against the avoidant, it was never really about revenge at all. It was about awakening. It was about the moment an empath finally sees that their love is not meant to be drained, but to be cherished. It was about realizing that silence is not emptiness. It is freedom. It is the quiet revolution of choosing self, respect over self-sacrifice, dignity over depletion, and peace over chaos. The avoidant may be left with the echo of what they lost, but the empath walks away with something far greater, the unshakable knowledge that they are whole, they are worthy, and they no longer need to beg for the kind of love that should flow freely. So, if you take one thing with you today, let it be this: your silence can speak louder than any argument, any explanation, or any fight. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and the most powerful person you can choose is yourself. Thank you for your time, for your presence, and for your open hearts. Until we meet again, take care of your energy, protect your peace, and never forget the power of your silence. Goodbye, and thank you.